Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 24th, 2021. Time for yet another show. It's Thursday, getting towards the end of the week. We got one more appearance from Greg Dworkin. That's good news. That gives us something to go on here. Because otherwise, I don't know. What do you want to talk about? New excerpt of the new book about how Trump sucks. I mean, it's basically it. It's my summary of it. I haven't read the book. No intention of reading the book. No time to read the book. Don't have the book either. That would probably help in terms of reading it. But we mentioned it was out the other day, and that's how I summarized it in, I don't know, in one of the I don't think it was the summary. I didn't write the summary that day, but I guess in one of the tweets sharing the podcast and making our social media announcement that the podcast is available. That's basically, I think that kind of sums it up. Like, okay, Trump sucks, and there's a new book that says so. And I think that probably wraps up the bulk of what's in there. Oh, we've got one of the laptop fans really going to town this morning. So lots of noise in the background. I think maybe we might be done with the weird rumbling in the background that's been bugging us for the last 2 days. But I bet there's more to come. There's a elementary school nearby that's getting a new roof during the summer vacation, and I've noticed sort of a dull roar and a seismic rumbling of the house over the last 2 days. They have no idea, of course, that we're doing a podcast over here, and if I walked over there and let them know, there's no way they could possibly care less about that. Nothing they can do about it. But now, of course, it's just in my ear, and I'll be thinking about it. But yeah, just before getting on the air this morning, somebody pointed me to the new excerpt from the book being shared in today's Washington Post, focusing on as they say, the extraordinary effort to save Trump from COVID-19. And I wasn't sure until I saw the picture accompanying the piece whether this thing was about the effort to save him from the effects, the electoral effects of having fumbled or intentionally blown the COVID-19 pandemic and killed several 100,000 people. We're now, according to the Worldometers, folks, over 618,000 dead. And, actually, I think I didn't note that we passed 618 yesterday. I'll have to check on Twitter. But anyway, I didn't know whether it was about saving him from the electoral effects or literally saving him. Remember that time that he actually had COVID? I think we've since seen plenty of reporting that says, yes, Trump was considerably sicker from his round of COVID than the White House was willing to let on at the time. And that really should surprise no one. And quite honestly, any president that had come down with COVID, no matter how effective he or she had actually been in combating the disease on behalf of the public, almost certainly they would have downplayed the effects of the disease at least until they knew what was going on, or until it was too late and the president was already dead and then they'd have to announce it. But anyway, Trump, of course, would insist that his White House double that effort. And indeed they did. But more than that, there was, of course, the scramble to get him monoclonal antibody treatments. And, I've been over this a million times, and I still remind everybody every day of the time he then came home from the hospital and promised to give monoclonal antibody treatments to every vulnerable senior in America for free. And I've been counting ever since then. I began a couple days afterwards, but I've been tracking since that day how many people have died where no discernible effort made to get them monoclonal antibodies anyway. Well, that's a difficult thing to track. And the longer I track this thing, the more people chime in and insist, well, there actually is a program in place that will, if you know how to pull the right strings and who to talk to. And some of the people actually saying, well, here are the people you should talk to. If you need this stuff, here's how to attempt to get it. But, I think, generally speaking, very few attempts to actually get it because there's a very tiny window, apparently, in which this treatment is effective and can make a difference. And basically, by the time you realize, oh my gosh, I really need some extraordinary intervention, it's kind of too late for this to be the intervention. So essentially, all it really means is, well, it wasn't as effective a therapy against mass infections and mass illness in a pandemic situation as it could be. But if you're in a one-on-one situation, like as the President of the United States, you probably get away with it. But in addition to the fact that he made this crazy promise to everybody and handing it out for free like Halloween candy, I mean, it was in October that he said he would do this, there's also the issue of how he went about, or how the White House went about getting the treatment for him. And I suppose if you read through the entire excerpt, I read just through the beginning of it, your blood will probably boil. So be careful. Don't do this at high altitude either. But at any rate, it's essentially the tale of how White House officials kept pressing the FDA to cut corners on their ordinary process for extraordinary approvals. They were already bending the rules, and they were very uncomfortable, as you might imagine, bending the rules even further and then just completely breaking them because the president wanted this stuff. And, it'll just make you angry and annoyed. So you might avoid it entirely because there's plenty of other things to talk about. We're all dealing with the effects of COVID still, so we could talk about that and reality and how normal people deal with things and what they should be doing. And Greg Dworkin's here to do that, and I should probably at this point jump out of the way. Good morning, Greg. Thank you for your patience. Appreciate it.
Oh, good morning. I was, while you were talking, I was tightening up the microphone boom that you talked me into getting, because I just wanted to make sure, right, with all the loose wing nuts floating around, that the yes, wing nuts here were at least, in reasonable position.
Yes, well, at least you have good wing nuts.
Well, the others were out last night. I think one of the more notable things that happened in the last 24 hours is a remarkable video discussion of Matt Gaetz questioning Mark Milley about wokeness in the military.
Was it his question? Okay. Yeah, I saw him shaking his head about it.
Because who else? And Mark Milley
that's a good question.
Gave a wonderful brief discussion about not only critical race theory, but the idea that you should be familiar with things, whether you agree with them or not.
Yes.
He pointed out he's read Karl Marx, he's read Chinese communist. That doesn't make him a communist.
Or Chinese.
But the fact of the matter is, you really need to know what's going on in order to deal with life in general. And as Nicholas Grossman points out, and of course Matt Gaetz is shaking his head saying, no.
You don't need to know this.
Nicholas Grossman points out Mark Milley exemplifies the scholar warrior, defending the value of better understanding, including of the U.S., and arguing that one can and should read ideas without agreeing with them. And of course, Laura Ingraham was outraged, being a loose wing nut herself, yes, and demanded that the military be defunded. Defund the military.
Oh,
because
really?
There's no problem with that kind of attitude when it comes to politics.
Yes, there was a guy
which puts
who said
the whole
thing
read. Just in so much perspective. First of all, the fact that, and this has been pointed out, that black scholars who have worked at the graduate level in law, especially on critical race theory, don't get mentioned at all. It's Mark Milley, the white guy, who's discussing it, that all of a sudden everybody's watching because the white guy is explaining what's going on. That's fine. If that's what it takes to bring this to people's attention in terms of what's going on, great. And he did a wonderful job with it. And he may not have gotten all the nuance right, and he said so. He said, I don't know everything about this, and I may need some education myself. Here's my understanding of what's going on. But the fact of the matter is, reading and finding out what people think is good.
Yeah.
And they were outraged
Reading
at that.
Is fundamental.
Still outraged at that. Outraged to the point where that low rumbling you heard in the background at that local public school is probably, the outraged parents marching on the school, getting ready to burn all the books in the library.
It actually is. Of course, I live in the what's now portrayed in the media as the epicenter of dissent over that in Loudoun County, now much featured. And I mean, it's not like houses are on fire out here or anything, but because we're in close proximity to Washington, D.C., two things. One, we have Republican activists and operatives who live here residentially but work in Washington, D.C. and in the think tanks.
Who are, in fact, those parents.
Yes, and who are, in fact, featured on Fox News as concerned parent, not as opposed to being featured as concerned parent / CEO of the Heritage Foundation or whatever it is that they actually do. And two, because it's happening within a half-hour drive of Washington Post reporters, it's in the Washington Post, and that means it's happening everywhere. Because as you've so often said, this is what happened to me on my drive to work this morning, so therefore the editor says front page news.
Right, especially if it happens in the editor's district.
That's right.
It's going to be a Sunday magazine feature.
And it kind of has.
Yeah. So Matt Glassman, who's a very sharp academic who used to be a political operative, says, as a political bogeyman, critical race theory is much better than things like the caravan because the hard-to-define nature of it lets people connect a wide array of disparate local grievances, some real, many nonsense, into an unfalsifiable story of centralized national danger.
True.
No idea if that'll translate into an electoral benefit, says Matt Glassman, reminding everybody that Governor Gillespie didn't find it very effective in 2017 in your home state of Virginia. But it seems much better suited structurally to do so than a concrete, definable, and falsifiable bit of nonsense like the caravan. In other words, the caravan's coming. Well, it didn't come. Oh, well, then it's coming next week. That's different than there's this thing out there, and it's insidious in nature. Play the scary music and show the bear in the woods.
Would you like me to? I can actually do that. I mean, it's easily available. It just takes up a lot of time, Greg. See, it's longer than you
Frau
think.
Blucher.
It occurs to me that it's a good comparison, of course, to the caravans, and I've seen some other people make mention of this. There's another good comparison, but it takes you got to go into the Wayback Machine to remember. But once you mention the phrase, you'll say, "Oh yeah, I never did understand exactly A, what that phrase meant, or B, why everyone was angry about it." But you might remember similar things: outrage at the school boards across the country and screaming, "You can't teach secular humanism in my kids' class." We went through a similar moral panic over that a couple of years ago. And then years after that, core curriculum, which sounds a lot less dangerous. But that sent people in a tizzy. That we knew what kind of
in addition to yelling at Mark Milley and reminding everybody of the Army McCarthy hearings, Laura Ingraham also gave the game away by saying, you know what this is? You know what this is all really about? It's calling white evangelicals extremists. That's what it is.
Oh, okay. Well, but that I could do on my own. I didn't need
because they're extremists.
That. Yeah, I mean, I guess once you say the word, the point is made. But, okay, well, that bothers her a great deal because, remember, she's the one that gave the Nazi salute at the convention. So...
Right, so it's just a very interesting action, counteraction, reaction. Point, counterpoint, nonsense stuff. And, the question is how much salience does it have and how long is it going to really stick? Well, Republicans are betting that it will. I mean, there's an article or 7 floating around about how Republicans are counting on this to use to take back the House. And I'm just not so sure that that's really a good strategy any more than the caravan was. I mean, it's annoying and it's worrisome because every time you look at it, you say, oh, my gosh, what if people fall for this nonsense? But the people who fall for this nonsense are the same 30% that fall for all sorts of fascist nonsense. Oh. And they have since Nixon. And so, I'm not sure that they're moving beyond that. There's a couple of points about that.
All right.
So we got some polling, which covers at least a little bit of it. One of them is a fairly new civics poll. That's out from June 19th, 2021. So it's fairly recent, margin of error 2.7%. And asks questions about how you feel about what's going on in the United States today. Do you feel worried that the U.S. is becoming less of a democracy? 61% say yes, very worried. And 26% say yes, somewhat worried. And only 4% are not worried at all.
Well,
7% are not too worried. So most people realize there's an issue. Of course, it's completely broken along partisan lines. Republican legislatures in many states have recently passed new voting laws. Do you think these new laws are an attack on American democracy or an attempt to protect it? An attempt to protect American democracy, 44%, and attack, 50%. So, it's the usual plus 7% Democratic generic ballot, For the most part, it's a 50-50 country, except it's really 53-47, which is usually enough to win elections, depending upon gerrymandering and whether or not the vote is suppressed.
Okay.
So, we are where we are. Democrats in Congress are currently proposing new voting rights legislation. Do you think this legislation is an attack on American democracy or an attempt to protect it?
Yes.
An attempt to protect it, 46. An attack, 43. Neither 3. I don't know, 8.
Okay.
So, again, it's pretty much along partisan lines. Do you support eliminating the Senate filibuster? Yes.
Sure.
Eliminate the filibuster, 38. Reform, but do not eliminate, 13. No, keep it, 38. Unsure, 11, which isn't bad. I mean, considering it's such an esoteric thing. It gets keep it and eliminate it pretty much even, 38, but another 13% say reform it. So there's some leeway to do it, but it's not like there's overwhelming demands to get rid of it. Just, so people are aware. And do you think America should remain a democracy? At least that's reassuring. Yes, 93%. Unsure, 4. No, some other form of government, 3. So the fascists are only 3%.
Well, they could be a different form. That's true. But, mostly I would guess. That's a difficult question to answer yes to and be taken seriously.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer no to.
I'm
But
sorry. No,
3%
yes,
did.
right. Right, exactly. But it's also difficult to answer yes because I don't know, because I said that it's wrong. But I'm going to do a Trump thing. You could also say no, but you could mean yes. You could say either one. I'm told. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Many people are saying.
I just said the wrong thing. Picked the wrong. Maybe that's it. 3% of the people said, well, what the hell was it? No. Do you really mean yes? What was the question again? Should a U.S. be a democracy? Oh.
Should it remain a democracy?
Right.
Well, that implies it was a democracy. Well,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, that's it. Right. They were criticizing from the left, just like the public option. That's what it was. Okay.
Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, federal student loan payments have been paused. Do you think this pause should be extended? Yes, 48. No, 43.
That's the follow-up.
Most of what's going on here is pretty much along party lines, but the Democrats slightly outnumber Republicans. So if you wanted some reassurance that that's the case and Republicans aren't overwhelmingly winning the argument, Democrats aren't either, but we start out ahead. As you may know, the Biden administration has announced several plans to vaccinate people in other countries. What do you think of that? U.S. should be doing more, 45. U.S. has done enough, 33. Again, a third of the country's like wingnut loose. Do you think physicians should be allowed to provide health care to transgender youth that recognizes and supports gender identity? Yes, 52. No, 33. Do you consider yourself a pro-Trump Republican? 31%.
Okay.
An anti-Trump Republican, 5. A Republican who doesn't have feelings about it either way, another 9.
Really, more
so that's 44% overall. I'm not a Republican, 55.
Oh, they didn't limit. That's not a question they limited to Republicans.
No.
Oh.
I guess.
I mean,
doesn't say it here. They just asked everybody.
That's odd.
So I out of the entire universe of everybody answering, only 31% is pro-Trump Republicans. Again, so as annoying as people like Laura Ingraham are, you have to have an idea of what universe of voters she's addressing here.
Sure.
And the answer is it's a third. It's the 23 to 30% that supported Nixon at resignation. I like to date myself by saying. Yeah. So do you think that Republican candidates for office should be supporters of Donald Trump or opponents of Donald Trump? Supporters, 32.
Right.
Duh.
Yeah, that's about the same
Everything
number.
about here is 32, 33 when you're talking about pro-Trump policies and Republicans. So do you agree or disagree with this statement? America must protect and preserve its white European heritage. Laura Ingraham, 100%.
Right, yes. Every Laura Ingraham who answered that question said yes.
Right. And every Tucker Carlson's, everybody in the White Power Hour segments of Fox TV at night agree.
Sure.
So agree with that. Do you agree or disagree with the statement, America must protect and preserve its white European heritage? 17% agree. 51% disagree.
Wow.
And 28% really don't want to deal with the question. And are annoyed you asked.
Sure. Right. I'm there. Well, whose poll is this?
This is Civics, Daily Kos.
I'm just curious. Okay, interesting, because this reminds me an awful lot of the early polling that Daily Kos commissioned on birtherism, where it was like, no, you can't ask people this. That's a silly type of question. That this isn't really happening, and this is amazing to see polling outright. Like, do you think we should stay a democracy? I don't know that anybody else would ask that question.
Civics and PPP are the people who would ask that sort of thing.
Right. And frighteningly, they're doing it because they know that there'll be people who say, no, we shouldn't be a democracy, and yes, we should preserve our white European heritage. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Good. Only 3% or so think we shouldn't be a democracy, but 17% think we should preserve our, white European heritage.
3% is zero. Yes.
Do you agree or disagree with this statement? People of color in America face discrimination and unfair treatment based on race. 56% agree. Again, 33% disagree. So you have that 1/3 who just don't want to agree with all of this. Right? And a third think that white people face discrimination. So, a third of the country is a lot, but it's not a lot. It depends what you're looking at it as. Okay. Is it a lot of people? Millions even? Yeah. Is it enough to raise a lot of money from solicitations by email or direct mail or scams? Sure.
Yeah.
Is it enough to win elections? Not in most places.
Right. Now,
but in some places.
A lot of suppression.
Yeah,
30% is
so that's
tough.
the background to all this. And I just think it's important to keep all of that in perspective when you're getting excited or depressed about today's news, depending upon what story you're seeing.
Okay.
Well, by the way, speaking of stories that you're seeing, at 11:45 today, the gang of senators, known as the Senate, is meeting with Biden advisors. As at 11:45, they're going to announce probably there's some sort of infrastructure deal, which will mean much mourning and tearing of garments and gnashing of teeth. And then it's following the plan that we've laid out the last couple of weeks, where this will get done, and then reconciliation, and then everybody will talk about how difficult it is and how uphill it is, and that it might happen anyway, because presidents tend to get what they want from their own party. So Biden and senators close in on bipartisan infrastructure deal. Lawmakers were set to take a tentative framework to the White House on Thursday. Administration officials signaled the president was prepared to support it, and in fact might even say so at 11:46.
Okay.
All right. I do have a copy of the General Milley statement. That is to say, I don't have the written part. I do have the video. I'm just going to send it to you to make sure all your listeners who look up what Scott Anderson posts later can see it. But one of the people who put together a little list of some of the actual good things that have been happening, because among all the bad things, like Republicans trying to steal elections or setting up so that they can in the future, Heather Cox Richardson put together some of the extreme stuff that isn't working so well. She writes, the extreme stances of the Trump Republicans are not going unchallenged. A new Monmouth poll shows that the numbers of Americans who believe the Biden won the election hasn't moved since November. So if they're trying to convince the American public that there was something wrong with the election, that's not working. Most Americans think continued agitation is an attempt to undermine the results. In Arizona, the so-called audit by the inexperienced Cyber Ninjas company hired by the Republican-dominated state Senate has become embroiled in controversy. One of the theories investigated was that a Maricopa supervisor fed 165,000 chickens at his egg farm shredded ballots, then burned down the barn to kill them.
What?
But Republicans are now distancing themselves from it because apparently that's not what happened. I guess it didn't involve pizza. or pedophile rings, so they didn't want to have anything to it.
Am I okay? Is that
Arizona talk show host Mike Broomhead, this is a great name, Mike Broomhead.
Yeah, really?
Who initially supported the investigation, now says it has become partisan and biased, and it should end.
Yes.
It was partisan and biased from the beginning, and it shouldn't have begun. But
right.
better late than never. Today in Michigan, that was yesterday's piece, the Republican-led Michigan Senate Oversight Committee released a 55-page report summarizing their 8 months of research into alleged voter fraud. We talked about this on the show yesterday. This committee, quote, found no evidence of widespread or systematic fraud in Michigan's prosecution of the 2020 election, it concluded. The report added, the committee strongly recommends citizens use a critical eye and ear toward those who have pushed demonstrably false theories for their own personal gain.
Like 165,000 chickens?
Yeah, or 165,000 Laura Ingrams. This month, the Southern Baptist Convention veered away from its formerly hard right stance to elect as president Ed Litton, but I have more on that one. Senior pastor of Redemption Church in Saraland, Alabama, who has focused since at least 2014 on racial reconciliation.
Reconciliation? Mm-hmm. Not that kind, but the good kind, the one that everybody understands. Okay, good. Yes. That's
most
really
dramatic,
something.
though, was today's testimony of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, at House Armed Services Committee, when Representative Matt Gaetz suggested that critical race theory was weakening the U.S. military. The general responded sharply. A lot of us have got to get a lot smarter on whatever the theory is, but I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault the building and try to overturn the Constitution?
Yes.
What caused that? I want to find out.
That
was a pretty good statement there.
It really was, and I love the subtle dig at the beginning. A lot of us have got to get a lot smarter. You specifically have got to get a lot smarter.
And then they had video of Gaetz shaking his head. No,
yes, he's scowling
and
right. I saw that video, and the one I saw was edited so that I didn't see who asked the questions. So, pretty incredible. That was well taken. Thanks for sharing that one. We'll be right back.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Wow, I'm just my mind reels. I was baffled and asking after this story that Greg brought us. Apparently, no indication that that's any kind of a joke. That somebody actually has floated the theory in the fake Arizona audit that some number of ballots. I don't have a number of ballots that we're missing, but I have a number of chickens that are missing. That's a real thing.
The Arizona audit force has now incorporated a chicken murder caper.
Unbelievable.
This conspiracy makes the conspiracies it's built on look, well, insane.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. I really thought that are you sure you didn't accidentally get a Andy Borowitz piece, and think that was a real headline or something? But and once again, a kernel of truth at the heart of it. At some point in I guess in Maricopa County, somebody who has an egg farm had a fire, and it burned down the chicken. Well, I guess it's ridiculous to call it a chicken coop when it houses 165,000 chickens. But so there was a fire. But somebody is out there saying, that was no regular chicken farm fire.
Right. That's no ordinary chicken farm fire.
Right.
The person who brought this
my
up was
God.
Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Reicher, who has written articles about how insane all of this is. He was on CNN with Don Lemon and pronounced himself fed up to the gills with the whole business, according to Charlie Pierce. And then he talked about the chickens, and here's the quote. No, the craziest conspiracy theory by far is the one of the Board of Supervisors who happened to own a very large chicken farm that took ballots from the 2020 election, fed them to the chickens, and then had them incinerated. What actually happened is a poor man had a serious fire at one of his barns, and 165,000 chickens died. But the idea that they had ballots inside of them, I mean, said Steve Reicher, and legitimate people indulge this. A prominent member of the state legislature indulged this in a conversation, and it's just, what's going on here?
That's what we needed to hear. Okay. I guess they're just not that legitimate, the people. They occupy legitimate positions, just it shouldn't happen. They should be, white guys in coats with nets chasing.
No, they just happen to be white guys, and so as occupying positions of power, they get to push this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you should be committed at that point. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just it doesn't even make sense. If you wanted to dispose of ballots, I mean, you could just burn the ballots, and maybe that accidentally. If you came to me with that, he stole a bunch of ballots and he set them on fire, and that accidentally set his chicken farm on fire, I might even say, well, that's not demonstrably as crazy as the rest of it, but the idea of then feeding it to the chickens and then burning the chickens.
Is going to believe this stuff, no matter how crazy it is, because they want to.
I guess so. If you could get a third of the people to believe that theory, I don't know. You know what? You deserve to win the election. Go ahead. You win.
I suppose. You win. Yep.
If you can be that persuasive.
Meanwhile, AP is pointing out a couple of other things in terms of keeping a lid on the crazy.
Which we have.
An Indiana woman on Wednesday, that would be yesterday,
yes,
became the first defendant to be sentenced in the January 6th insurrection and avoided time behind bars. Fine. Okay. You just trespassed. But the next part of the sentence, I think, is the more interesting. While a member of the Oath Keepers extremist group pleaded guilty in a conspiracy case.
Okay. Well,
and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in a major step forward for the massive investigation. So the two developments together signal that the cases against those charged are slowly advancing.
I guess so.
The wheels of justice grind very slowly.
All right, I'll examine that article perhaps at some point and see what she was charged with. But
Braden Young, who was accused alongside 15 other members and associates of the Oath Keepers of conspiring to block the congressional certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory, pleaded guilty to 2 counts, conspiracy and obstruction of an official proceeding. It was the first guilty plea. Second charge calls for up to 20 years in prison, and so now they're getting a little bit of cooperation there.
Okay, that's not.
Now, Anna Morgan Lloyd of Indiana was ordered by a federal judge to serve 3 years of probation, perform 120 hours of community service, pay $500 in restitution, and I guess you have to draw the American flag, not the Confederate flag, 500 times.
Yeah, I don't know what she did, but I'd like to read up on it. But
she pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor under a deal with prosecutors.
Unbelievable.
After the riot, Lloyd had described January 6th on Facebook as the best day ever. On Wednesday, she apologized to the court, her family, and the American people, saying she went to Washington to peacefully show her support for Trump.
And accidentally invaded the Capitol. All right, so...
She's ashamed. She is ashamed it became a savage display.
Oh, yes.
Prosecutors noted she was not involved in any violence and destruction or pre-planning or coordination. She was invited by her hairdresser to drive to Washington to hear Trump speak, she said. And so, these things happen.
They can be very persuasive, too, hairdressers. People trust them. I don't know what it is, but it does happen.
You probably read about this lady, because after her arrest, Lloyd's lawyer gave her a list of books and movies to help her see what life is like for others in the country.
Yes.
She's the one that watched Schindler's List and
did see that
the History Channel's Burning Tulsa, and she read Byron Stevenson's Just Mercy and said, I've lived a sheltered life and truly haven't experienced life the way many have. I've learned that even though we live in a wonderful country, things still need to improve. People of all colors should feel as safe as I do to walk down the street.
Right. Meanwhile, the hairdresser was executed. This is at an outrage.
We don't talk about that.
Unbelievable. I don't know what happened to that person, but maybe that person didn't go into the Capitol and
Right.
know.
And so, again, you want to glean some of the good
That
news
is
or at least
interesting, yeah.
surprising news out of all the bad news that's happening.
All
These
right.
are some of the stories that help. Nice summary by Heather Cox Richardson there. But this is another one that I came across, which, given our discussions about the Israeli election, surprised me a little bit because I didn't expect to see this in the New York Times. Populist leaders in Eastern Europe run into a little problem.
Okay.
Unpopularity. The leaders of Slovenia, Hungary, and Poland, who rode to power on waves of anti-elitism anger, face rising opposition over their pandemic response and heavy-handed policies.
Ah. Yeah, okay. Oh, really? Oh, this is an anti-lockdown protest now?
After winning elections by
they've done
railing against
terrible
widely
in Eastern
disliked elites, right-wing populists in Europe's formerly communist eastern flank, turns out, are themselves not much liked. This is due in large part to unpopular coronavirus lockdowns.
I see.
And like other leaders, no matter how their political complexion, they're stumbling responses to the health crisis. But they're also under pressure from growing fatigue with their divisive tactics, or as people like to say on TV, divisive. And in Hungary, for example, Viktor Orban is being countered by an uncharacteristically united opposition. In Poland, the deeply conservative government has made an abrupt shift to the left in economic policy to win back support. And in Slovenia, who no longer has a champion in the First Lady, the hard right governing party of the Trump-loving prime minister is slumping disastrously in the polls. And he's probably the one who's in the most political danger at this particular point in time. This Mr. Janša in Slovenia had a approval rating of 65% last year. This has since plunged to 26%. And Mr. Janša is so unpopular that allies are jumping ship. Okay, but the thing that struck me was a line in here, which I'm going to try and find.
All right.
Mr. Trump's defeat has added to its malaise, this right-wing wave here, along with the recent toppling of Israel's longtime leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, whose pugnacious tactics have long been admired by nationalist leaders in Europe despite the anti-Semitism that infects parts of their base.
Yeah.
And they were America's political convulsions, this analyst added, by Ivan Krastev, an expert in East and Central Europe in Vienna, is that once confident populism of leaders like Mr. Janša from Slovenia and Mr. Orban from Hungary morphs into a more dangerous apocalyptic populism of the kind that's gripped segments of the right in the U.S.,
Yes.
It's dangerous, but America's political convulsions, he added, are less relevant to Eastern Europe than the fall of Netanyahu, a country that he described as the true dream of European nationalists, an ethnic democracy with a strong economy, capable military, and an ability to resist outside pressure. The negative coalition against Netanyahu deeply shocked Europe's right-wing populist leaders because Israel was their model.
Yes.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
It is
That's
interesting.
a take I hadn't heard.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't have guessed, that's a real surprise to me. Not coincidentally, as you mentioned about the COVID thing, both Hungary and Slovenia in top spots, in well within the top 10 in COVID deaths per million for Hungary, actually number 2 in the world, recently up to number 1 until Peru reevaluated its figures. And Slovenia also in the top 10 of cases per million. I mean, they're doing horribly. These are categories in which the United States has made an exit, by the way, if you want it by comparison.
So, how is the United States reacting to all of this? Maybe democracy's in a slightly better position than we thought. Republicans in Michigan, for example, are coming to the conclusion that half of us are nuts, and Republicans in Arizona are coming to the conclusion that everybody in Arizona is nuts, who's a Republican pushing this fraud it. And Biden's getting together his infrastructure week. And again, the voting rights thing is a big deal, but there are plan Bs, as we talked about on the show yesterday. So there's 2 approaches to this. One, of course, is the Politico approach. It must be Democrats in disarray because it's always Democrats in disarray. Their headline is, progressives are no longer so pleasantly thrilled with the Biden era. Lawmakers and activists have begun going after the president directly after failures on voting rights amid prolonged infrastructure negotiations, skipping the fact that there are actually things happening. And then when you go to the article, and you read actual quotes from actual progressives, let me quote, and not all Democrats, and even all progressives expect or want Biden to be more vocal. Calculating the party's slim control of the House and Senate and the still intact legislative filibuster requires compromise. Representative Karen Bass, a progressive's also House Democrats' lead negotiator on police reform, said she didn't believe the Biden administration should be more active in the negotiations at all. The White House has been extremely helpful, but acknowledging the reality of the 50-50 Senate, I think it's important to let the Senate work its will, she said. Representative Mark Pocan, a former chair of the Progressive Caucus, said Biden isn't the issue. Let's face it, the problem's going to be Manchin and Sinema and a couple of other folks. I'm sure he's having all sorts of conversations. And I found so far that I don't have to second guess what Biden's doing behind the scenes because he's doing all the right things. So imagine how outraged the progressives are when they say things like that.
Yeah.
Huh. It doesn't sound all that outraged to me.
Right. Huh. I am.
Headline. Click. Well, gee, that's not what the article says. That's never happened before.
Hey, look at the chicken thing over here. But
So Walter
the
Shapiro,
critical race theory
who's
blimp.
actually one of my favorite analysts. He's, shall we say, a senior analyst. He's been he's been analyzing stuff since George Washington.
That's very senior.
Why are Democrats acting like the sky is falling? He writes in the New Republic. The Biden administration's already accomplished a lot, and the party's in a better position than many on the left claim.
All right.
On the one hand, these Democrats rightly believe that the progressive agenda on climate change, voting rights, and immigration is strongly popular with voters. But on the other hand, many of these same Democrats fear if far-reaching legislation is not somehow rammed through Congress this summer, it'll never happen in their lifetimes.
Well, yeah. People are afraid of that. That's true. Is that wrong? Oh, I don't know. I've lost you. So that's interesting. I'm getting the reconnecting. There's a poor network connection beep here. Let's see. Come on, reconnection. Oh, boy. All right. Well, I'm not certain exactly what's deal with that. Abby might have chewed through the internet. That's a possibility. Let's see. All right. Oh, answering this call. Oh, he's calling again. Let's see. How about if we merge the calls? What would happen then? Try this. Now, Greg Dworkin missed the call. All right, let's try this. We'll hang up this call, and then I will answer that call. Try this. Oh, dear, but I think the audio might be coming through in the wrong side of things here. All right, let me try calling you, Greg. Hang on a second. I think we really need to disconnect all of this, and then let me try calling Greg through the... There we go. We'll try and see if this works. How about that? Hey,
Hello.
Greg. Okay, hi. Abby chewed through the internet again, I think.
Yeah, well, don't try this at home, folks.
Don't worry about it. You know what? Go ahead and try it. You'll never be able to connect.
You'll never
Everybody give it a try.
You'll never be able to reproduce what just happened now.
Right.
So Walter Shapiro says, in normal times, the Senate moves at a pace that even a French winemaker might consider leisurely.
Okay, that's a upper crusty joke.
Yes, but, we've talked about this on the show. The Senate takes forever.
Winemakers.
If somehow Democrats were to agree on an incremental reform like forcing Republicans to filibuster on the Senate floor in marathon sessions, it would tie up Congress for months. By historical standards, the passage of Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus alone would have been an epic achievement for any president in the past half century. Then there's the stunning triumph of vaccines over a pandemic, and you have a Democratic narrative for the 2022 elections that would have seemed fantasy just a year ago. But instead, many Democrats have convinced themselves that the end is nigh. Of course, each week another GOP-led state legislator concocts a new way to make it harder to vote.
Yeah.
But what Democrats have failed to realize in their despair is that their short-term political future seems far rosier than their downcast demeanor would suggest. And I said to him this morning on Twitter, that's because we're Democrats.
Well, yeah. That's true.
While it will be difficult. Remember,
too.
Republicans act confident even when they're losing.
Right.
And Democrats act like the world is ending even when we're winning. That's been true for like decades.
Absolutely.
While it will be difficult, albeit far from impossible, to hold the House after redistricting, the Senate map for 2022 actually looks somewhat promising in reflection of how difficult it is to be Trumpian enough in the modern GOP. Republican incumbents are retiring in potentially winnable states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio. There's vulnerable Democrats in Georgia and Arizona, for example, but a plausible case can be made that if the economic recovery stays strong, Schumer will be majority leader in 2023 with an additional vote or two to spare. And longer-term trends also help in places like Cobb County, Georgia, Maricopa County, Arizona. And the biggest obstacle that the Democrats must surmount in 2022 is the poised on the window ledge dejection of party activists and left-wingers. Gallup poll released Wednesday found a sharp drop in the approval rating for Congress after Biden signed the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief plan. 54% of Democrats give Congress a positive rating, but now it's 38%. By placing such unrealistic expectations on Biden and the Democratic Senate, these voters have set themselves up to believe that electoral politics are futile. There's something in the soul of the Democrats that invites self-inflicted torment. Why else would so many of them assume that the game is permanently lost when in reality the team's leading in the third inning? Sounds like me, this guy.
Yeah, to an extent.
Probably why I like him.
Maybe. Yeah, all right.
I mean, these things can go sour without question about it, but it's not all, doom and gloom. It's just not.
That's true. I mean, there's certainly reason to believe that everything will be considerably better than
it's not
worst
painless
worries.
either. It's not like everything's just great. It's terrible.
I guess
but,
remember
there's
that
a path.
what he's
and
not
as long
telling
as there's
you
a path,
is,
it's your job to work to clear that path. That's all I'm saying.
And we'll say that what he's not telling you is everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't even do anything. Just sit here and wait, and we'll be returned to power by the elections automatically. No, that's not what's being said. So never take it that way, and you're free to go and do all the. Well, I mean, he also can't stop you from worrying, but
right.
And if you were inclined
finally, just to put things in perspective, because I like subtle analysis. I like nuance.
All right. Yes.
Right. And some of these, we win, we lose, don't have any nuance to it. So I'm going to turn to the Southern Baptist Convention. In my quest to always talk about things I don't know that much about, but I found this guy who does. Right. His name is Brian Kaler, and he blogs at a blog called Word and Way. He's a preacher.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess.
And he knows about this stuff.
That kind of word, right.
The revolution at the SBC annual meeting. And I just found this one of the more interesting takes on what happened. If you recall, as we were following along at home, the very, very super ultra right wing group tried to install their own president there, and they lost to a really conservative, but compared to this other guy, moderate. And so the really conservative, except compared to the other guy, moderate, won, which was something of a surprise because everybody thought that the truly ultra conservative guy would win. So
like the Israeli
he's trying to
elections.
explain what happened here, Brian Kaler is, and he says the revolution at the SBC annual meeting was quickly portrayed as a defeat for the denomination's fundamentalist wing. The messengers, that is to say the delegates, rejected the attempt to shift the convention further to the right, and while the contest for the SBC's top office tells that story, other votes reveal something else at play throughout the annual meeting. Rather than fundamentalism being dismissed, what happened is anti-elitism was embraced.
Anti-elitism. Okay.
Yeah. And this is a thread that you could see throughout, for example, Trumpism. So it's populism. So it's just interesting and has a lot of ramifications elsewhere. Consider what transpired shortly after the meeting began. Ronnie Floyd, the man who runs the denomination on a day-to-day basis as CEO of the executive committee, approached the microphone with other leaders to give a report, and the recommendations quickly sparked debate, amendments, and opposition. An attempt from the executive committee to change its own mission statement brought challenge from the floor. Instead of saying that the executive committee exists to minister to the churches, the proposed revision would indicate that the executive committee seeks to empower churches.
All right.
And the messengers, that is to say the delegates, said, that's unacceptable. We tell you what to do. You don't tell us what to do. We're changing empower to serve. Executive committee serves us. It doesn't empower us. We are the power.
All right.
We're a bottom-up, not a top-down convention of churches. The local church is the headquarters, Shelton said to applause. The churches empower the executive committee. The executive committee does not empower the churches. This linguistic reminder of who actually runs the convention was only the beginning.
Okay.
An outcry arose to another EC recommendation, granting itself the power to compel reports and actions from other institutions with the refusal to comply involving the risk of seeing funds escrowed. I don't think it's wise to give our executive committee additional authority, said John Candler of Kentucky. especially when they're under investigation for their response to sexual abuse and other perceived overreaches.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Right? Later, a rewrite of the ministry statement for Lifeway Christian Resources failed, and the messengers refused to give another term to the executive committee member that the executive committee had just elected on Monday as the vice chair.
Oh, all right.
Right? Well, you just made him vice chair. Well, we're
on.
saying he can't even be on the committee.
All right.
So now you got to get yourself a new vice chair. Wow. And so this unspoken but clearly obvious guerrilla warfare continued throughout the convention. Something no less significant than Floyd's vision for the entire SBC was the next target. Floyd had talked about this plan for over a year. He had led those gathered in prayer before offering a passionate 40-minute sermon on Vision 2025. He prayed again before calling for a vote. I mean, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. Nancy Pelosi gets up at the microphone and says, the most important bill that we have in this new Congress is H.R. 1, and we think it exemplifies everything that Democrats stand for, and she puts it on the floor and it loses.
Yes.
I mean, that's basically what this is. So the messengers amended Vision 2025 by adding a sixth strategic action, including that the SBC prayerfully endeavor to eliminate all incidents of sexual abuse and racial discrimination among our churches.
Okay.
A smaller edit to the wording of another one of the initiatives was proposed. All the alterations passed. The planners of the meeting were caught off guard. They had all these big signs with the original, statements that had been amended, but not the amendments.
Well,
and they stood as symbols of the expected submission missing in Nashville. And then the rebellion continued on. More and more stuff that the people who set up the meeting wanted to pass failed. And perhaps the biggest rebuke to the SBC's leaders came in a call to investigate the EC's mishandling of clergy sexual abuse cases. Amid growing controversies in the weeks leading up to the meeting, Floyd announced a third-party group would conduct a limited inquiry. The executive committee rejected a push to broaden the investigation, so Messenger Grant Gaines of Tennessee motioned to create a task force outside the EC, and that won.
Okay.
And these other votes illuminate the dynamics of the presidential election. In the runoff, the second most elite candidate lost, while both Litton, who eventually won, and Stone, the ultra-conservative guy who eventually lost, stressed their pastoral roles in the campaign. Stone, the guy that lost, is the immediate past president of the SBC Executive Committee.
All right, yeah, that was a bad spot to be running from this time.
Right. News reports on various EC scandals in the weeks prior to the meeting highlighted this aspects of Stone's resume. So the point is that when everybody's saying, oh, look, the fundamentalists lost, that must mean that the SBC is moving left. Well, actually, the fundamentalist lost because the fundamentalist was associated with the scandal.
Yes.
That's like a big deal. Both Litton and Stone employed their I'm just a pastor, I'm just a country pastor, I'm just a country preacher rhetoric in competing for the top job is a parallel here to the rise of outsider candidates in political campaigns, most notably the way former President Donald Trump triumphed over an array of governors and senators in the 2016 Republican primary by railing against elites and rather than promoting the value of experience, refrains that one is not a career politician are far more common today among those seeking careers in politics. Those with elite backgrounds like Cruz or Hawley even pose as insurgents fighting an establishment they claim to abhor but desperately want to be.
Yes.
For the elites, with their long histories of credentials and years of ladder climbing, the current social atmosphere must be disorienting. And they mentioned one early candidate who was expected to win who got shot down, metaphorically speaking, very, very early. And he had great credentials, and none of that helped him.
Okay.
And then goes on to talk about the history of the Southern Baptists and how that's not unusual for them.
Oh.
And why is all of this important? It's the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. The SBC both influences and reflects cultural shifts. The anti-establishment ideology ruling Washington and state houses showed up at a church convention in Tennessee, and the rabid rejection of elitism leads many, especially Republicans and white evangelicals, who are the bulk of Southern Baptists, to not trust the explanations of the media or the government officials about who won the election or the importance of masking and vaccination during the coronavirus pandemic. And at its worst, this brand of politics leads to moments like January 6th. So the real story here is not about who won or lost, but about where power was most forcefully wielded. The populism within the SBCs theological DNA should serve as a warning to the new guy. He's no longer an outsider, no longer just a local church pastor. Now he's the establishment, and that means the insurgents are coming for him.
Yes, eventually. But that's the dynamic we discover time and time again inside the Democratic Party, both nationally and in the local organizations.
Yeah, so I thought it was very, very helpful in terms of understanding what was going on there.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because I was following along with the story and saying, maybe this is good. I can get behind this. And then, of course, I find out, what they're really comparing it to is the same movements that backed Trump and ended up in the insurgency, and that worried me all over again. But interesting how they leverage the accusations of cover-up of sexual abuse cases, but leverage that from a right-wing populist standpoint instead. It's very interesting. I had my sympathies were with them for a moment, and then I remembered they could actually be very dangerous people all in their own right. Okay. Something to watch, that's for sure. I don't know how to feel about that, but it's not my convention, so I guess I don't have to.
But it's the largest Protestant convention in the U.S., and it does have ramifications. And what I take out of this, among the other things, is that the elitist credentials, the credentialism, certainly doesn't work, and that fits the times. But also the concept and the idea that the longer you've been there, the less we can trust you, is quite interesting in terms of not only that it exists, but why it exists.
Yes.
The fact of the matter is that you've been there trying to cover up, your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein means I don't trust you. And I don't care what setting we're talking about, and I don't care whether you're a liberal, conservative, or anything else. I mean, that's real.
Yeah.
And visceral, and I think that's, it's part of what's going on here.
All right. Well, I guess I can't. I don't know. I'll just.
It's complicated. I mean, people are complicated. Stories are complicated. I'm saying that the cartoonish, this is what happened at SBC.
Yeah.
The ultra right people lost.
That's
it's not so simple.
Would look at it. Right.
There's nuance here. It's not so black and white.
It's true. Yeah. It works both ways. Don't get too excited about the people who unseated the people you didn't like in the first place. Okay. Yeah. And that's the Israeli election story all over again, too.
Understand the people that lost, but don't get excited about the people that won.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Greg. Let's take a break for the weekend, why don't we? All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And boy, oh boy, everyone just truly enjoying the opportunity to think about the relationship between the struggles of Eastern European right-wing populists, the Israeli election, and the Southern Baptist Convention, and for that matter, the local Democratic Party organization, and let's say the sweeping out of the old and then sweeping in of the new, when the new was Howard Dean supporters, and then the Howard Dean supporters becoming the establishment and being swept out by the Bernie Sanders supporters, and who knows what the next wave will bring. That all of these things exhibit the same political dynamics over and over again, enough to make you believe that there might be some fundamental rules, if not laws, that you might say develop into a discipline known as political science. And people would say, science? How can you apply the label science to political? Surely it's much more of an art than a science. Possibly true. However, I keep having the same feeling that I'm reading the same story over and over and over again when I'm examining the political dynamics of entirely disparate political organizations peopled by entirely different, people. And patterns are emerging. And what should I do about that? And the answer is, don't give me your critical theory. I'll shut you down. That's the end of that. All right. Well, very interesting. It's remarkable how many connections, how many dots there are to connect between those otherwise unrelated stories, you would think. I don't know. To me, that's fascinating. But what do I know? I'm an idiot. Let's see. Other things that are happening this morning, and there are an awful lot. And I kind of do want to get to that. Do I want to spend time on the Washington Post thing, just getting outraged about how many rules they bent to save Trump? He is out of office. He's supposed to be irrelevant now. He's not. And as a matter of fact, I just saw, what did I see flying by on Twitter? Probably from The Hill. And now, of course, if I mention it, then I have to go track it down. It was that I guess a bunch of Republican members of Congress, because they are Republican members of Congress, this is what they do. They were going to be making a border visit, one of those for show things where they go and maybe they ride up and down the river in a gunboat or something like that. And Trump is going. I don't know who initiated the trip. The Hill's tweet is House Republicans to join Trump for visit to border. And I mean, I guess we should read the article so we can figure out exactly what's going on, but not the whole thing. It's not that important. Around a dozen Republican members scheduled to join former President Trump next Wednesday during his visit at the border, the Hill has confirmed. Members from the Republican Study Committee will join the former president at the U.S.-Mexico border. The latest sign that Republicans are maintaining a close proximity to Trump, that we understand. I guess what's curious to me is Trump glomming on to a Republican study group trip to the border, or is the Republican study group glomming on to a Trump stunt at the border, or did the Republican study group, design this trip with the idea in mind that they would lure Trump into it? I don't know which. Probably the last one. But I guess it's just sort of interesting that he's, A, still relevant, and B, yeah, it shows that there are plenty of Republican House members who are going to tie their fortunes to him. But that also plays into the other question about these trips to the border, which I'm reminded just the other day we saw Fox News ask the question at a White House press conference, why hasn't Vice President Harris gone to the border? And, the Jen Psaki dealt with that appropriately. And then days later, when the vice president's office announces that she actually will make a visit to the border, Fox News asks, why is pointedly questioning, why is she going to the border? What's she trying to do? And I mean, it's like you can't take yes for an answer. Do you want to go to the border? You asked the other day, how come she hasn't gone? Now let's say she took your questions under advisement and decided, all right, I will go to the border. And I mean, is it just I told you so kind of a thing that they just want to have a gotcha moment, or we forced her to go to the, is that what they're looking for? Credit for that? Or what? I don't know. But again, if she doesn't go, they question why she doesn't go. If she goes, they question why she's going, and whatever. Okay, so that's what's going on at the border. Nothing else. There's probably more chaos and controversy at the border around staged visits by politicians to the border than there is about actually crossing the thing. So anyway, I'll have to get note to myself about Harris and the border, and give you the proof that I didn't actually just imagine that. Because, I honestly, at this point, what's the difference between my stories and the 165,000 chicken story if I can't provide a link for you? It makes it all the more important that you be able to establish what you're talking about. All right, let's see. Other things going on. There's plenty out there that I think deserves mention. Yesterday I made brief mention of the story that CNN was reporting about Ivanka and Jared, privately being appalled at Donald Trump and his antics. And I made the point on the air and on Twitter, but I kind of want to reiterate it. We really do need to. This is a great story to think about reframing. I mean, no one will adopt my frame, I'm sure, because they're much more interested in adopting the political frame, whether they want to carry water for Jared Kushner distancing himself post-administration from Trump or whatever. That's the point of the bulk of this article. But I really do think that, here they've thought they've instructed their publicists to try to distance them from the election conspiracy theory nuttery that's going on. We're not involved in this particular set of crimes. However, it is, I would say, evidence that they are neglecting their duties to their family patriarch. I mean, Donald Trump is dangerous enough that he ought to be put away for various reasons. He's a danger to himself and others. And there's some serious questions about his mental condition, I would say. And I think it's incumbent upon his kids as next of kin to see what they can do about having him comfortably retire and stay out of danger. And they're just not interested in doing it because there's a lot of money for them to still make with Dad on the rampage. And it's worrisome. It's elder abuse. It's neglect. And if we were only in a place where we could have a serious inquiry by the proper authorities into that question, that'll never happen just given who he is. And, the rules are different of course, for rich orange people. And the rules are different for, former presidents as well. So, it's not like I anticipate that coming to the fore at any point, but you really should from time to time think about what he's doing in that light. All right, let's see. Look, Greg has shared with me here a story about, pretty much everything that I've had to say with respect to what's been going on with the critical race theory and the angry public meetings at school boards. They've been happening around the country, but like I said, they've been focusing on Loudoun County for the reason that it's in close proximity to Washington and all that entails. And he sends me a link to John Storr's editorial board tweet. I think it's safe to say the backlash has arrived. The Tea Party is long dead, but a new fake protest movement is in the making. See Loudoun County, where I am. The comparison to the Tea Party is one that I've seen people make and that I myself made just the other day, that this is very much like the astroturfed, or at least semi-astroturfed efforts to pack the town hall meetings of members of Congress, particularly Democrats, during the run-up to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and the Tea Party would jam-pack those things and scream about socialism and tyranny and Hitler and death panels, etc. And the same thing is going on here, both the potential astroturfing, the moral panic, and the strategy is very much the same. But yeah, we had a raucous school board meeting here a couple nights ago that resulted in people being arrested, dragged out of the place, and the school board eventually voting to close public comment on what? I don't know. I mean, there was once again, just like every other one of these crazy meetings, there is no critical race theory being taught in the schools in this district or anywhere else. It's not a primary, secondary school subject. But of course, people are using the infamy and the panic that surrounds it, the sharing of the phrase critical race theory, basically to say anytime a teacher says anything like, hey, shouldn't we all treat each other equally regardless of our skin color? Or they teach, people in America have had to protest to try and win their civil rights because they've been discriminated in the past. That's critical race theory. It's about race, and it makes me a little uncomfortable, or sounds vaguely liberal, or a little too kumbaya for me, and so therefore it must be critical race theory, and it's not. But lots of things have to do with race and aren't critical race theory. Anyway, it's gotten to the point where people are now being dragged out and handcuffed. And the video circulating yesterday, the right-wing folks circulating video of the Loudoun County School Board voting to close public comment on whatever the hell was being debated at the moment. And then, of course, people shouting, censorship, tyranny, blah, blah. And apparently the context not captured for some strange reason in the right-wing video clips being circulated is the initiation of the meeting along with some ground rules for debate, which ground rules were immediately violated by the angry people who had come to the meeting repeatedly, and after repeated warnings, repeated violations, until finally the board says, there's nothing we can do. You clearly are not interested in following the rules. More to the point, they probably should have said, you clearly are interested in capturing a clip of video of us acting tyrannically by saying, okay, it's been 3 hours of you people yelling about something that's not happening now, and we're done. We've had our debate. And then you'll clip that out and send out the part about us ending debate and say, yet more tyranny, and that's exactly what happened. Well, maybe that makes a good Friday inquiry to read through the accounts of things. And it's occurring to me, though, it's not something I've been involved in, even though it's happening here and around me, and that I know people who are on the school board, and I feel terribly sorry for them. And this is a great example of no good deed going unpunished. You run for a school board and say, I just want to be a part of helping keep the quality of education up here while my kids are in the public schools. And you get a thing like this dumped on you, which is entirely fabricated. And then it makes your working life hell. But then, of course, because of the nature of the subject and the type of people who get riled up about it, it also results in, nightly death threats being phoned into your home. And who needs that? And, they're just as happy, these protesters, to have the outcome of this be that you either resign from the board because you can't take it anymore, or you run a half-hearted campaign for re-election because you can't take it anymore, or you run away entirely, or you give in to their demands in the hopes that they'll leave you alone and not kill you. That's what they're looking for. Although I've been thinking it's time, obviously, to get involved in these things. It's not my usual beat, but maybe it's time to organize, or see if I can find somebody else to organize something that, they're showing up to the meetings and just screaming their heads off, but it's a public meeting. But that also means that normal people who don't want anything to do with that and might otherwise stay away from such meetings because of it, maybe we now have an obligation to show up for the meetings. You don't have to bring a speech. Don't prepare anything. Don't bring a sign. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Don't interact with people. Don't do anything. You literally bring headphones. Listen to something else. Listen to a podcast. Listen to this podcast if you want while you're there. It would be nice if you actually listened to the business, if any is getting conducted. But I'm just saying, just go to occupy a seat. Every seat that somebody who's going to sit quietly for whatever reason during the meeting is a seat that doesn't go to somebody who came there to scream and throw things and get arrested. And you have just as much right to those seats as anybody else. And if you can fill half the auditorium with people who are not there to foment a riot, it gets that much more difficult to actually find the courage for those who thought, who came there thinking about fomenting a riot, to actually go through with it. If the whole place is packed with their supporters, it's a lot easier to do it. You got more numbers. You feel more in tune with, the rest of the people there. But if it's questionable, if 50% of the audience is sitting on their hands, it might not happen. It's a thought. I'll have to see what comes of it. And unfortunately, the answer is usually, but I really wanted to watch TV that night, as is the case with so many opportunities for activism, political or otherwise. Anyway, let's see. Other stories that deserve... I'll make mention of the fact that John McAfee is dead, and that's kind of exciting. He was sort of a weirdo, and it's just kind of a strange story. It got shared a lot last night, maybe because of the weird circumstances surrounding it. I happened to grab the New York Daily News headline, which is always bound to be inflammatory. Antivirus pioneer John McAfee, in case you were wondering where you knew that name from. John McAfee found dead in Spanish prison. That's all unusual, and I have not been tracking the latest in the John McAfee saga, so I wasn't aware that he was in Spanish prison, but I guess other people are. And it's a little weird. By way of background, John McAfee, the eccentric founder of the antivirus software company bearing his name, eccentric is an understatement, was found dead inside a jail cell Wednesday shortly after Spain's national court approved his extradition to the United States, according to Spanish government officials. And so I suppose the idea is despondent at having lost his case, maybe he killed himself. The 75-year-old cybersecurity pioneer and highly controversial figure, let's say, who faced federal tax charges, tax evasion charges, and cryptocurrency-related crimes, and is suspected of many more, even more lurid crimes, appears to have died by suicide while being held at a penitentiary near Barcelona. Okay. The regional Catalan government confirmed to the Associated Press that a U.S. citizen died at the facility, but didn't mention his name or possible cause of death. Well, it's John McAfee, and the possible cause of death is suicide. The shocking development came just hours after the decision on the extradition. The controversial entrepreneur was arrested at Barcelona's International Airport in October after American prosecutors accused him of failing to file tax returns from 2014 to 2018, despite earning millions of dollars from cryptocurrencies, speaking engagements, consulting work, and selling the rights to a documentary about his life, which I guess they can finish now. The aspiring libertarian politician who ran 2 long-shot bids for president in 2016 and 2020, did you notice? Fooled the Internal Revenue Service somehow by having the money deposited into the bank accounts and cryptocurrency exchange accounts of other people, according to federal prosecutors in Tennessee. In March, he and his bodyguard, Jimmy Gale Watson Jr., were slapped with new charges in Manhattan federal court, accused of running a $2 million pump and dump scheme of cryptocurrency through McAfee's Twitter account in 2017 and 18, and God knows what else. I guess, by the way, worth mentioning, McAfee also arrested in the Dominican Republic in 2019 after he and 5 others were accused of traveling on a yacht carrying high-caliber weapons, ammunition, and military-style gear. He was released after 4 days in custody. He was also investigated in connection with the murder of a neighbor in Belize, I guess where he was living, and then fled the country, eventually arrested in Guatemala, set to be extradited there, but released after suffering 2 small heart attacks, which he later claimed he had faked. So it's hard to feel too terrible about this guy actually dying eventually, but gee whiz, it's wild, and somebody's going to do an autobiographical movie about his life, and I've ruined the ending for you. Spoiler alert, he kills himself in a Spanish jail cell. So once you get around to that side, once he's arrested, I guess, in Spain, if you can't hold it anymore, just go to the bathroom. He dies in the jail cell. Sorry to ruin the story for you. All right. Well, anyway, he was a bizarro guy and isn't anymore in every sense. So, okay. Awfully disrespectful of me. Moving on. Story from the other day, which we didn't discuss yet, and I will try and squeeze in at least some of it just to acknowledge it, something to watch. I don't know where it's going. I don't know how it develops. But New York Times reporting the other day, Saudi-ish operatives, who killed Khashoggi received paramilitary training in the U.S., that is to say, beforehand. They learned to be bone saw operators in the U.S. No surprise, we very frequently train people in military and paramilitary skills that are, unworthy of our shining beacon of democracy, et cetera, but are justified on the grounds that we are killing worse people elsewhere, or letting the locals take care of killing worse people elsewhere. One of the, more shameful episodes of our history, but continuing to this day, and I don't know, somehow approved as pragmatic. Anyway, I guess when you're fighting a global war on terrorism, it's bound to continue, and there's really no other way to fight such a war, quite honestly. So we're in for it. for now and in the future. Anyway, the training approved by the State Department underscores the perils of military partnerships with repressive governments. It does, at that. Mark Mazzetti, Julian Barnes, and Michael LaForgia, the reporters on this June 22nd story, for Saudis, that is to say, people who live on the estate of the Saud family, which we all recognize as a nation state, Saudi Arabia. 4 of these people who participated in the 2018 killing of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi received paramilitary training in the United States the previous year under a contract approved by the State Department, according to documents and people familiar with the arrangement. The instruction occurred as the secret unit responsible for Mr. Khashoggi's killing was beginning an extensive campaign of kidnapping, detention, and torture of Saudi citizens ordered by, you know who, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, to crush dissent inside the kingdom. And while he was hanging out in the desert in a tent, grooving in some fashion with Jared Kushner, who's totally not involved with Donald Trump anymore. The training was provided by the Arkansas-based security company Tier 1 Group, which is owned by the private equity firm Cerberus Capital Management. That's a whole other interesting angle on everything. We could spend a year on that. The company says the training, including safe marksmanship and countering an attack, was defensive in nature and devised to better protect Saudi leaders. One person familiar with the training said it also included work in surveillance and close quarters battle. And I guess all that work, I mean, it used to be done by the School of the Americas, at least when it was truly paramilitary or military in nature. And that was always a controversial place. And I don't know whether they ever did finally shut that place down or not. There's some good documentaries and writing about that, but I guess we now contract that out as a result. Oh, look at that. By the way, a note from the John McAfee story, Mighty OCD telling us he killed himself with a virus. Oh boy. All right, well, one got through. It's the importance of good, strong antivirus software. It could have been. What if it was COVID? That would be something. It wasn't. Anyway, the training was provided, I guess it was outsourced to this Tier 1 group. They're owned by private equity firm Cerberus. That's worth noting. There is no evidence that the American officials who approved the training or Tier 1 group executives knew that the Saudis were involved in the crackdown inside Saudi Arabia. But, come on. The fact that the government approved high-level military training for operatives who went on to carry out the grisly killing of a journalist shows how intensely intertwined the United States has become with an autocratic nation, even as its agents committed horrific human rights abuses. And there were probably 10 that would have made us ashamed of the whole situation had the Khashoggi thing never happened. There were still more to point to. It also underscores the perils of military partnerships with repressive governments and demonstrates how little oversight exists for those forces after they return home. How could there be any real oversight for it? They've gone home. They're now under the jurisdiction of their home countries. I mean, it's better if you don't send them there with this information, I guess. But then I guess suppose every once in a while we're grateful for the whole thing when the people that they kill are people who were planning attacks on the United States. I guess that's when it becomes a good thing. But there are others more level-headed who would say, well, might never really be something you want to call a good thing. Such issues are likely to continue as American private military contractors increasingly look to foreign clients to shore up their business as the United States scales back overseas deployments after 2 decades of war. That's a good thing, to scale back deployments. The State Department initially granted a license for the paramilitary training of the Saudi Royal Guard to Tier 1 group starting in 2014 during the Obama administration. The training continued during at least the first year of the former President Donald Trump's term. Louis Bremer, a senior executive of Cerberus, Tier 1 Group's parent company, confirmed his company's role in the training last year in written answers to questions from lawmakers as part of his nomination for a top Pentagon job during the Trump administration. Gee whiz, how did they get all those contracts? The administration does not appear to have sent the document to Congress before Mr. Bremer's nomination expired. Lawmakers never received answers to their questions. Did he land at that top Pentagon job without our finding out about it despite the inquiries? Probably. Once again, another illustration of the problems of failing to flex your muscles in congressional oversight. The document, which Mr. Bremer provided to the New York Times, said that 4 members of the Khashoggi kill team had received Tier 1 group training in 2017, and 2 of them had participated in a previous iteration of the training, which went from October 2014 to January of 2015. The training provided was unrelated to their subsequent heinous acts, Mr. Bremer said in his response. In other words, they didn't get trained in the use of a bone saw per se, but it made them into tough, hardcore bad guys, and the kinds of guys that you might assign a job like this to. All right, I'll continue to review this perhaps during the break. We'll see whether there's anything more we can glean from this article, and head into our final segment of this Thursday show after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here in Netroots Radio. Scanning at the same time as I'm trying to talk through this, the rest of this article, and there's an awful lot to it, and we probably could spend the rest of the show on it. But I think I know where I think we all know where this is going, and just in the sense of, generally of, well, it was a terrible idea, and yet it's something that we continue to do, and sometimes find ways of justifying regardless, and et cetera, but lots of other connections in here as I skim through. First of all, I guess we could note here that a 2019 column by David Ignatius of the Washington Post first reported that members of the Khashoggi kill team had received training in the United States. He wrote that the CIA had, quote, cautioned other government agencies that some special operations training may have been conducted by Tier 1 group under a State Department license. That was it wasn't the CIA cautioning people, hey, don't do this training. It was them cautioning them, oh, by the way, a firestorm might erupt soon because we trained these guys, or at least some of them. And then I was skimming down further where, let's see, how far did I go down here? Let's see. Mr. Trump weighed installing the head of Cerberus, Stephen A. Feinberg, in a top intelligence post last year, but the appointment was never made because he's such an effective doer of things. While the Trump administration had appointed Feinberg to lead the president's Intelligence Advisory Board in 2018, questions emerged about potential conflicts of interest. Cerberus formerly owned the military contractor DynCorp, which, among other things, provided intelligence advice to the United States and other clients. It was unclear which members of the Khashoggi kill team participated in the Tier 1 group training. 7 members of the team belonged to an elite unit charged with protecting Prince Mohammed, according to an American intelligence report about the assassination, declassified in February. The role of operatives from the so-called Rapid Intervention Force in the Khashoggi killing helped bolster the American intelligence case that Prince Mohammed approved the operation. Then I was skimming down even further and thinking about the time we spent, during an October period a couple of years ago, maybe like October 2018, just sort of when we really got off on the kick of examining just sort of the nature of our weird relationship, and Jared Kushner's weird relationship with the Saudish and the Saud royal family. And when we were first hearing reports that the Charm Initiative undertaken by Mohammed bin Salman was hiding perhaps a darker side, and we began to learn about what was going on with the rest of the royal family and how he was imprisoning them in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. Lots of questions arising, and that phrase, in fact, jumps out here as I skim down further in the article. Do we introduce this thought here? The earlier iteration of the training, which took place during the Obama administration, occurred before Prince Mohammed consolidated power in the kingdom. His predecessor as Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Nayef, was a close ally of the United States, and in particular of John Brennan, who served as the CIA director under Barack Obama. Prince bin Nayef was the Saudi counterterrorism chief and collaborated closely with Obama administration officials in working to dismantle al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a terrorist group or the terrorist group's affiliate based in Yemen. Not clear that we did a great job with that one, by the way. In 2017, Prince bin Salman pushed Prince bin Nayef from power and executed a broader campaign, executed a terrible choice of words there, to wrest power from his rivals, including a notorious episode of imprisoning Saudi royals and businessmen at the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. The Trump administration considered him a valuable partner in the Middle East, especially for the administration's strategy to isolate Iran, and Prince bin Salman developed a close relationship with Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who served as a senior advisor to Mr. Trump. And later on, in separate articles read more recently, we came to realize the ambitions that Mohammed bin Salman had in involving himself in affairs in Israel and occupied Palestine, and and we can fight about the use of those terms later on. But yeah, it gets, as they say, curiouser and curiouser. All right, let's see. By the way, under federal rules that restrict foreign sales of American arms and military expertise, Tier 1 Group was required to apply for licenses to train the foreign operatives. Those license applications were examined by State Department officials who were processing tens of thousands of licenses per year and approved. The approval would have allowed members of the Saudi Royal Guard to enter the United States on visas processed by the American Embassy in Riyadh. The path is similar to the one followed by Second Lieutenant Mohammed al-Shamrani, a Royal Saudi Air Force officer who, does anyone remember? Does anyone recognize the name? Who opened fire in 2019 at a naval air station in Pensacola, Florida, where he was receiving military flight training. The attack killed 3 people and wounded 8. So, there's some problems with the program. Tier 1 Group was founded to train U.S. military personnel, taking advantage of an expanded Pentagon budget for military personnel training in basic counterinsurgency skills, according to former American officials familiar with its operation. One of the company's founders, Steve Reichert, former Marine, was working as an instructor for the security contractor then known as Blackwater when he met Mr. Feinberg. With Mr. Feinberg's backing, Mr. Reichert set up Tier 1 Group, according to Reichert's 2020 account of the company's founding and former intelligence officials familiar with the efforts. In other words, working as a security contractor for Blackwater, and said, I could be doing this myself and getting rich off of it, but I need financial backing. He meets a rich guy, and voila, Tier 1 Group is formed. Decisions about granting licenses to American firms to train foreign nationals usually made after getting input from numerous government agencies, said R. Clark Cooper, the Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs during the Trump administration. The Pentagon and intelligence agencies often play a role. These things don't just come out of the ether, he said. Mr. Cooper said he could not recall any discussion about Tier 1 Group training of Saudis, even after Khashoggi's killing. He said there was intense there were intense deliberations inside the Trump administration about how to respond to the killing. In the end, he said, administration officials did not want to squander America's relationship with the kingdom, whatever it might be, and the strategy of isolating Iran by taking a heavy-handed approach after Mr. Khashoggi's death. No government is going to flush a significant bilateral relationship over this murder, no matter how horrific it was, he said. Well, others would disagree, but inside government, actually, probably, no matter what party dominates, he's probably right about that. Interesting to see how, this intricate process with lots of rules was manipulated such that the rules proved no barrier. And I guess maybe we could use that as a segue, if you want, into the reading of the excerpt from the book about how the Trump White House bent, broke, demolished, bulldozed the rules to get Trump the whatever they were calling, the monoclonal antibody treatment that he needed, apparently, to survive his bout with COVID-19. By the way, before I get there, just one quick note as I'm scrolling past it in Pocket. Add this one to your files. Once again, I don't know, I need some sort of trumpet fanfare. The Republicans have succeeded in finding, or somebody succeeded in finding actual voter fraud. Somebody who cast a ballot twice in the presidential election, and as was always the case, what political party did this person affiliate with? The Republican Party. A Republican official in Ohio, according to NBC News, faces charges for voting twice in the November election. Why? Filled out a ballot for his father, I think, who died before the election. I was simply trying to execute a dying man's wishes, said Ed Snodgrass. There are no good Snodgrasses out there. I'm sorry if your name is Snodgrass, but I'm having you investigated. But please continue to listen to the show by all means, Mr. or Mrs. Snodgrass, as the case may be. Republican lawmakers in Ohio pushing for more safety and security at the ballot box can now point to a clear example of voter fraud in the November 2020 presidential election. Unfortunately for them, it involves another Republican, Edward Snodgrass, Porter Township trustee. I guess he's not very trusty, but he is a trustee, has admitted to forging his dead father's signature. Check the signatures. Forging his dead father's signature with bamboo and dead chickens on an absentee ballot and then voting again as himself, court records and other sources revealed. Snodgrass was busted after a Delaware County election worker questioned the signature on his father's ballot. A subsequent investigation revealed the ballot had been mailed to H. Edward Snodgrass on October 6th, a day after the 68-year-old retired businessman died. And by the way, October 6th was the day before, it was October 8th that Trump was grudgingly released from Walter Reed Hospital and returned home to the White House to then promise remdesivir or whatever it was to Regeneron, who knows, to every vulnerable senior in America. So H. Edward Snodgrass got his ballot mailed. It was the day after he died. So October 5th he died. I think Trump was into the hospital on October 5th. So ironies abound here. In an interview with NBC News, Snodgrass said he made a quote, an honest error. Nope. No, you didn't. While struggling to take care of his dying father. That's a problem. I understand. That's going to create issues in decision-making. Who had advanced Parkinson's disease. He said he had power of attorney for several years because his dad had broken his right arm and he'd been signing for him on things. He said his dad requested the absentee ballot. I'm sure he did. If there was it was there with a pile of other paperwork, Snodgrass said. I was sleep deprived and not thinking clearly, but I'm not going to run away from it. Okay, well, good. Hopefully you can't run far. You should go to jail. I don't know. They keep calling for everybody else to go to jail. All right. Well, he's due back in court on July 9th. where, according to a plea agreement, he's expected to plead guilty to a reduced charge of falsification and receive a sentence of 3 days in jail and a $500 fine. By the way, I'm just wondering if he's ever added his voice to the chorus of voices calling for executing Americans who do this sort of thing if they are voting for Democrats. Just want to point that out. Lock him up, but only for 3 days. I guess that can be the new chant. All right. Well, anyway, we don't need to dive too far into that one. That takes us away from, remember, we were trying to use this to make a segue over to the Washington Post story about Trump. Although I do feel like this is going to be it for the show, so I feel like squeezing in one other thing. I want to make mention, and maybe we'll discuss tomorrow, make mention of the fact we're now aware of what craziness Ron DeSantis is up to today down in Florida. Apparently an outgrowth, I guess he's trying to expand on the critical race theory mania, and now signing a law, this has now become a Ron DeSantis special. Send me a bill that, is totally unenforceable. But something that says, we're going to outlaw X, bad stuff from now on is against the law in Florida. Sign it, and he shows everybody the signature doing the Trump move. I mean, Trump totally invented that thing. We'll give him credit for that. This time, a law banning indoctrination of any kind in schools, except there's no definition of what does indoctrination mean, what constitutes indoctrination, what are you going to do if you find it, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, when examined on multiple levels, it's a horrible idea and an obvious political stunt. But, we can only inspect so many political stunts in a single day here on the show. So maybe tomorrow for that one, unless something else intervenes in the meantime. But first, inside the extraordinary effort to save Trump from COVID-19, I just feel like I gotta see this. I want to read it, and you're going to read it with me. His illness, the subheader says, was more severe than the White House acknowledged at the time. Advisors thought it would alter his response to the pandemic. They were wrong. People who thought there would be logic in the world were wrong. And again, this just leads to the, conclusion of how horrible a person, how horrible a leader was Donald Trump. Everybody, his own advisors thought, well, now he's got to take it seriously. And it was at that point that he stopped taking it seriously. And like I often wonder, history will demand to know why we didn't hang Trump. This just makes it look worse. All right, who reported today? Damian Paletta and Yasmin Abutaleb. A excerpt from the book Nightmare Scenario, Inside the Trump Administration's Response to the Pandemic That Changed History. Let's just dive into it because we're running low on our time already as it is. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar's phone rang with an urgent request. Could he help someone at the White House? Someone. Obtain an experimental coronavirus treatment known as a monoclonal antibody. If Azar could get the drug, what would the White House need to do to make that happen? Azar thought for a moment. It was October 1st, 2020, and the drug was still in clinical trials. The Food and Drug Administration would have to make a compassionate use exception for its use since it was not yet available to the public. Only about 10 people so far had used it outside of those trials. Azar said, of course, he would help. Azar wasn't told who the drug was for, but would later connect the dots. But guess what? It wasn't the dot you were thinking. The patient was one of President Donald Trump's closest advisors, Hope Hicks. She got the monoclonal antibodies? Hope Hicks. How does she do it? Well, now we know. A short time later, FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn received a request from a top White House official for a separate case. This time with even greater urgency. Could he get the FDA to sign off on a compassionate use authorization for a monoclonal antibody right away? There's a standard process that doctors use to apply to the FDA for unapproved drugs on behalf of patients dealing with life-threatening illnesses who have exhausted all other options, and the agency's scientists review it. The difference was that most people don't call the commissioner directly. I mean, you don't think that people looking for life-saving treatment want to get the approval within an hour and just start taking the drug right away, but they can't have that. They just aren't the president. The White House wanted Hahn to say yes within hours. Hahn, who still did not know who the application was for. Could you just give me a blank check? consulted career officials. The FDA needs to go by the book, the officials insisted. Hahn relayed the message back to the White House. They kept pressing him to effectively cut corners. No, we can't do that, Hahn told them several times. We're talking about someone's life. We have to actually examine the application to make sure we're doing it safely. Can you imagine? You know what? Can I just say, I wish they had effed that up. I wish they had said, yes, Mr. President, no problem, Mr. President, and given him something that would have killed him. That would have been fantastic. Would have saved a lot of problems. And then everybody says, yeah, but then Mike Pence would be president. Well, as you know, Republicans eventually came around to wanting to hang Mike Pence, and maybe we should let them do that too. I don't know. Sometimes maybe it pays to give in to Republicans. Let them have their way, especially if they're saying, yeah, get out of my way. I want to jump into that snake pit that I built at the border. All right. Won't stop you. When Hahn later learned the effort was on behalf of the president, he was stunned. You know, how could that possibly? I'm stunned. I don't know. It's not really the right music for it, but I guess, I don't know, maybe this would have been. Maybe it would have been better.
What the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
Just give him the monoclonal antibodies, but give him 10. All right. Well, now he's stunned. For God's sake, he thought, it's the president who's sick, and you want us to bend the rules. And what's amazing is, on the Trump side of the coin, they're like, for God's sake, it's the president. Of course I want you to bend the rules. Trump was in the highest risk category for severe disease from COVID-19. But by the way, he didn't give a flying F about that and didn't help anybody and didn't believe it was real until he got it. And then he cured himself and then told everybody it wasn't real again. Yes, he was in the highest risk category, 74 years old, rarely exercised, considered medically obese, though he tried to hide it by having Ronnie Jackson pretend he was 6'3". He was the type of patient with whom you would want to take every possible precaution. As it did with all compassionate use applications, the FDA made a decision within 24 hours, so it's not like, you have to wait. But they wanted less than 24 hours. We wanted 1 hour. Agency officials scrambled to figure out which company's monoclonal antibody would be most appropriate given the clinical information they had and selected the one from Regeneron, known simply as REGEN-COV, C-O-V. I don't know, COV, I guess. Okay, so now we get the official name of the drug, finally, long last. A 5-day stretch in October of 2020, from the moment White House officials began an extraordinary effort to get Trump life-saving drugs to the day the president returned to the White House from the hospital, marked a dramatic turning point in the nation's flailing coronavirus response. Trump's brush with severe illness and the prospect of death caught the White House so unprepared, and how else would you catch this White House, that they had not even briefed Vice President Mike Pence's team on a plan to swear him in if Trump became incapacitated. But then they later wanted to hang him. So whatever. For months, the president had taunted and dodged the virus, flouting safety protocols by holding big rallies and packing the White House with maskless guests. But just 1 month before the election, the virus that had already killed more than 200,000 Americans had sickened the most powerful person on the planet. Karma had arrived, I would add to this, but apparently it's not in here. Trump's medical advisors hoped his bout with the coronavirus, which was far more serious than acknowledged at the time, would inspire him to take the virus seriously. Perhaps now, they thought, he would encourage Americans to wear masks and put his health and medical officials front and center in the response. Instead, Trump emerged from the experience triumphant and even more defiant. He urged people not to be afraid of the virus or let it dominate their lives, disregarding that he had had access to health care and treatments unavailable to other Americans. Not just disregarding that he had had access, but standing on the south lawn of the White House and videotaping himself swearing practically on a stack of Bibles, but promising that he would give that access to everyone else. Nothing special about me. I'm going to give it to all of you. You're vulnerable. I hate to admit it. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to give it to you free. Again, I say it every day on Twitter, but I got to reiterate it. Possibly, and this is a big thing for Donald Trump, the sickest thing he ever did. Out of all the horrible things he did with his life, to go through that and to leverage the power of the presidency to get himself that kind of special treatment and then tell everybody, F it, go on, who cares, don't wear masks, don't be afraid, I'll give you the same drug that saved my life, I'll give it to you for free, go ahead. And then nobody got it. And we're today probably we could go top 400,000 additional deaths since the day he did that. Waiting for where's my delivery of the free stuff? Dead. He's still walking. It was, to continue the story, as several advisors said, the last chance to turn the response around. And once the opportunity passed, it was the point of no return. And now 618,000 people are dead. I'm focusing on the number because later today we will also pass, as I marked as I call it around here when I do these things, the city of death. The size of the death toll, according to Worldometers, and now, of course, it's been several months since people have found that, excess deaths tell us that it's probably creeping up on 1 million dead from COVID, not 618,000. But today, the equivalent of the population of, are we on to Lexington, Kentucky, the 29th or so largest city in the United States, it has been killed, just according to this lower estimation that we use through Worldometers. Of course, if you're talking about 1 million, well, then you're talking about something wrong, closer to the size of San Jose, California, the 10th largest city in America. But yeah, Louisville, Kentucky has 618,338 people. And by the way, we're also creeping up on killing our second state. A long time ago, we passed the equivalent of the entire population of Wyoming, and sometime probably next week, we will pass, according to Worldometers, the entire population of Vermont, our second least populous state. But again, didn't really think we would be would we make it to the point where we're working our way up from small states, entire states dead. Like, well, that's one way to get rid of their electoral votes, I suppose. The week leading up to Trump's infection was frenzied, even by his standards. On Saturday, September 26th, he had hosted a party with scores of maskless attendees to announce Amy Coney Barrett as his pick for the Supreme Court justice. The celebrations had continued indoors, where most people remained maskless. By that time, the virus was surging again, but Trump's contempt for face coverings had turned into unofficial White House policy. He actually asked aides who wore them in his presence to take them off. Murdering bastard that he is. If someone was going to do a news conference with him, he made clear that he or she was not to wear a mask by his side. The day after the Supreme Court celebration, Trump had also hosted military families at the White House. At Trump's insistence, few were wearing masks, but they were packed in a little too tight for his comfort. He wasn't worried about others getting sick, but he did fret about his own vulnerability and complained to his staff afterwards. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? Why didn't he just die from this? It's unbelievable that that didn't happen. Why were they letting people get so close to him? Meetings with Gold Star families are sad and moving, he said. But he added, if these guys had COVID, I'm going to get it because they're all over me. He told his staff that they needed to do a better job of protecting him. And then he ran out and licked doorknobs to prove that he was a man. 2 days after that, he flew to Cleveland for the first presidential debate against his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden, who he was doing everything he could to give him COVID. Trump was erratic that whole evening, but that could have been from anything. And he seemed to deteriorate as the night went on. The pundits' verdicts were brutal. I wish karma had been more brutal. Almost 48 hours later, Trump became terribly ill. Hours after his tweet announcing he and First Lady Melania Trump had coronavirus infections, the president began a rapid spiral downward. His fever spiked and his blood oxygen level fell below 94%, at one point dipping into the 80s. Sean Connolly, the White House physician, attended the president at his bedside. Trump was given oxygen in an effort to stabilize him. The doctors gave Trump an 8-gram dose of 2 monoclonal antibodies through an intravenous tube. The experimental treatment was what had required the FDA's sign-off. He was also given a first dose of the antiviral drug remdesivir. Different. Okay, good. Also by IV, now I understand. The drug was authorized for use, but still hard for many patients to get because it was in short supply. But Trump grabbed several doses off the market. And remember, by the way, that he packed away a couple others in the refrigerator for later, just in case, as well. We learned earlier in the year. Typically, doctors space out treatments to measure a patient's response. Some drugs, such as monoclonal antibodies, are most effective if they're administered early in the course of an infection. Others, such as remdesivir, are most effective when they're given later, after a patient has become critically ill. But Trump's doctors threw everything they could at the virus all at once. His condition appeared to stabilize somewhat as the day wore on, but his doctors, still fearing he might need to go on a ventilator, decided to move him to the hospital. It was too risky at that point to stay at the White House. I think we've learned all of that in the past, but still worth reiterating. My God. And I don't know, at this point, should we just call it off for the day? Probably so. But we'll do one more paragraph, because that's where it breaks in this story. Many White House officials and even his closest aides were kept in the dark about his condition, but after they woke up to the news, many of them were asleep when Trump tweeted at nearly 1 a.m. on Friday that he had the virus. Cabinet officials and aides lined up at the White House to get tested. All of a sudden, now they believe in it. A large number had met with him the previous week to brief him about various issues or had traveled with him to the debate. It was unclear even to Trump's closest aides just how sick he was. Mildly ill, as Connolly was saying? Sicker than they all knew? Trump was supposed to join a call with nursing home representatives later that day as part of his official calendar. Officials had been scheduled to do it in person from the White House, but that morning they were informed the call would be done remotely. Trump's aides insisted that he would still be on it, but hey, guess what happened? As one aide waited in line for a coronavirus test, she saw Connolly sprint out of his office with a panicked look. That's strange, the aide thought. An hour or two later, officials were informed that Pence would be joining the nursing home's call, and Trump couldn't make it. What a story. Time now, though, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and you better believe it. I bet he'll be covering a bit of this, too, but let's see if I can pick out a nugget or two that we didn't touch that he will.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
No, this sounds mysterious. There are disturbing parallels to the days leading up to the January 6th Capitol insurrection as anticipation grows around the end of the fraudulent Arizona election audit. I guess we're all supposed to wait for the chicken crap to hit the fan, and he's got the latest word on it. That and much more. Stay tuned. See you tomorrow.